Now for tonight's guest. As I mentioned earlier, next week the British government will unveil a spending review foreshadowing deep cuts across all government sectors. The new Prime Minister David Cameron and his coalition believe it's a painful but necessary measure to rein in Britain's enormous debt. Already the government's announced it'll stop paying child welfare to families in which either parent earns more than about $70,000 a year. That's already prompting anger and raising broader questions about fairness in these spending cuts. Will Hutton's the former editor-in-chief of the Observer newspaper. His latest book is titled Them and Us, Politics, Greed and Inequality and Why We Need a Fair Society. He joins me live from London. Will Hutton, tell us a little bit more about the reaction to the cutting of the child benefit.
Well, it's created a very vigorous, rigorous is pretty understating it. I mean, it's really battle lines are down. I mean, on the right, everybody, from the right-wing commentariat through a lot of Conservative MPs and Conservative think tanks are saying absolutely right. I mean, that there should be a cap on the amount of money that benefit recipients get, and but it's also wrong that actually people who've worked very hard should lose their child benefit. So and on the left, people are saying, well, child benefit is a universal credit, so everyone who has a child in Britain gets this payment, this flat rate payment. Everyone should get it. It's because parenting a child is something everybody does. It should be protected to the last. And they're saying, why penalise the poor by putting a cap on their benefits? So really the battle lines are drawn in Britain.
Is there perhaps a broader discussion that needs to take place here about the nature of welfare and what it actually is these days? Is it a safety net? Is it something else?
Well, I've written this book about what constitutes fairness, and the BBC Today programme is going to consecrate the next fortnight to discussing what's fair. You can't open a newspaper without someone writing about what's fair. And what you have is on the one hand, you have a very free market, libertarian view of fairness. I eat what I kill. It's only fair that if I, risk things, that I should, have all the money that arises from that. If I work hard, it's only fair that everything should accrue to me. And then there's an egalitarian view of fairness on the other hand, which says, hold on a minute, we're all in this together. Everyone has to pull together, and there should be more kind of equality. What I try to say is that actually fairness is a combination of both those things. Fairness is also about luck. If you're on the right, you basically say, look, if you're poor, you probably got there through a series of choices that you made yourself. And the left always say, well, no, it's all about, circumstances, who you were born into, what family you were born into, what kind of part of the town you were born into, how good your school was. It's not due to you at all. And, what I think one has to do here is to tease out how much of one's circumstance in life is due to, just bad luck, and how much it's a lifestyle choice. You have to work out that. You also have to work out to what extent, those who, to what extent you put an upper boundary on how much people can make and how much people should have as wealth, so that they can redistribute to those at the bottom. It's a huge and urgent discussion, and my God, has it been reopened in Britain the last few days.
But doesn't everything that you say indicate that the notion of fairness is entirely subjective, so therefore how do you incorporate it into thinking about government policy?
Well, no, I don't think so, you see. I think I think most people watching this show in Australia would say, well, hold on a minute, it's not unreasonable that somebody who does well should make more than somebody who doesn't try, but actually within limits, because actually if you run a school or run a great company, you do require everybody to put their shoulder to the wheel. So, proportional payment, proportional reward is people's due desert. People also think if there's bad luck, you should be compensated for it, and if there's good luck, people should share in it. I think that's a broadly based principle. I also think people care a lot about the process. An arbitrary decision that comes out of nowhere and changes the rules of the game without any pre-notification is regarded as unfair everywhere. So I think there are actual basic ground rules of fairness that are true in Australia, true in Britain, true in the United States, true across Asia. I think the thing is to tease them out, and then you can start to constitute a welfare system.
How does that fit, though, around, if we go back to that child benefit? You say that fairness incorporates the idea of luck or hard work and that people accept that, but doesn't what's going on around the child benefit issue show that there are people in Britain on around £44,000 a year, that's more than 70,000 Australian dollars, that think that they're deserving of welfare? Is that something new over recent decades?
Well, they think they paid into it, and they think they should take out. Probably with these things, it's my process point. If you suddenly change the rules in the middle of the game, people have had children in Britain expecting they're going to get child benefit. Now suddenly they don't, and people on 44,000 a year think, hey, that's just completely arbitrary. I mean, what you have to do is to say to people who have children now, look, if you have children now and in the future, then, the rules of the game are going to be that you won't get child benefit. You can't, suddenly reverse the decision to have a child. And I think that's one big issue about it. And another big issue is that I do think that you have to think of, bringing up a kid is different for someone on 70,000 Australian dollars a year than someone who's on 10,000 Australian dollars. It just is a different experience. And what you have to do, I think, is to create substantive universality. For people on $70,000 a year, they should get help for child rearing and parenting that is different, I think, in character from the help you give to someone who's on 10 or 15,000 Australian dollars a year. Everyone should get help, but it should be tailored to their particular circumstance. That makes sense. Just giving everybody the same damn payment where they're high or low or in the middle, I think has begun to lose its kind of legitimacy and its resonance.
You said before that there's a general acceptance that people should earn more or less based on their contribution, but how does society decide what is fair for one person to earn in relation to each other? How do you decide, for example, does J.K. Rowling deserve to earn more than an emergency room nurse? And then if you think she should, then how do you determine what magnitude is fair?
Well, if you have a really genuinely competitive market, and you take your goods to market, and the market puts a price on it, that's a fair process. If you go into any market town and look at people's produce, a farmer who's done well and who's grown products or developed his livestock so they're better than his neighbours, deserves a fractionally higher price. Now that is the principle, I think. So I think that's one rule you can have. Another rule you can have is that I think that I'm leading a review for the British government actually on whether or not the top pay to bottom pay in the public sector should have about an upper limit of 20 to a base of 1, so that nobody in the public sector in Britain could make 20 times the lowest paid person. And the government also want me to see whether that could be used as a norm for the private sector. So you're saying, yeah, of course you can make a lot of money, but if it's a team effort, if it's an organisation, then if you join it at the bottom, then you need an amount to get to the next level, an amount to get to the next level, an amount to get to the next level. But you can do all that within a ratio of 20 to 1. Someone like J.K. Rowlett's written a fantastic series of books. She should actually, if we want to go out and buy them worldwide, she should benefit from that, absolutely. But she should pay tax. And when she passes her all the wealth she's inherited to her children, she should pay inheritance tax on it. That's really the framework, I think.
But she's already paid tax on it once. Why should there be another tax on it?
She's not paying it. Her children are. Her children just were lucky enough to come out of her loins. I'm not saying that all the money that she's made should be taxed. I should say, 20, 30% should go to the rest of us because, after all, we bought the book and we made her wealthy, and she had the great good luck to strike it quite so lucky, and that's fine for her. But for her children and for her children's children, we're not in the business of creating dynasties in Western democracies as if it's Confucian China or in Imperial India or wherever. We're interested in some churn in our societies, and you can't have people's children's children wealthy, fabulously wealthy, because of what some grandparent did hundreds of years ago. You've got to actually tax their wealth as it moves from one generation to another. Yes, the majority of the wealth can stay with J.K. Rowlett's children, but a degree has got to come to the community, and then we can earmark that money and invest it in our depressed areas, invest it in people who don't have the same opportunity or chance as those children.
But isn't the desire to set one's children and one's grandchildren up for life one of the great motivators in working hard and being innovative and coming up with good ideas?
No, I just don't agree with that. In fact, I think that's hokum. I don't think people... I'm sure that you don't work hard just to make sure that your grandchildren live in a huge estate in 100 years' time. Andrew Carnegie made a lot of money in America in the 19th century, said that a really rich man who's really wise aims to give it all away and leave nothing for his children. And, of course, Bill Gates Sr. and Warren Buffett, two of the richest men in the world, have said just the same thing. And there's a whole club in America of billionaires who think inheritance tax should be higher. It wrecks the children and wrecks grandchildren just to be given money they never, ever deserved or earned. And it also creates a dynastic class. It creates closure in society at large. Every society, from Rome and Greece, through Confucian China, through the Inca civilizations in Latin America, through even feudal Europe, taxed the transfer of wealth from one generation to another on exactly this principle. It's only now that we start saying such ludicrous things, and let's conspire our societies in creating family dynasties. It's nonsense. You want churn, you want mobility in a really healthy capitalist society, otherwise it ossifies.
On the spending review that's due next week, do you accept the Tories' premise that the best course of action for Britain at this stage is deficit reduction?
Britain has a deficit of 10% of GDP, a lot lower actually than we thought in the worst of the recession. And that's nearly as high, that's higher than it was in the early 1990s and higher than it was in the mid-1970s. And we got the deficit down, had to get the deficit down after those two crises. But we took 7, 8, 9 years over it. But we did a good measure of it with tax increases. This time round, not much is being done by tax increases. Nearly all the burden has been taken by spending cuts, and it's been done in a crash programme over 5 years. And it's in the aftermath of a severe credit crunch. Never forget, it didn't happen in Australia, but it certainly happened in Britain. Nearly our banking system in its entirety was hours away of collapsing. The American financial system, not much better. I mean, the Irish system, you can see what's happening there. I mean, all around the world, there were echoes of this. In the wake of a credit crunch, it's going to be very slow growth. So for countries just to have crash programs of deficit reduction, I think is an enormously high risk. You've got to have at the very least a plan B in your back pocket if things go pear-shaped, and you should also be very careful about the pace at which you cut the deficit when the private sector is as flat on its back as it is in Britain and, frankly, many parts of the world. Not so much in Australia, I know, where you've actually had a good recession. But in large parts of the world, and in Britain in particular, it's been, frankly, bloody awful. And, the notion that we can get back to business as usual in 5 years without actually managing these cuts forensically, carefully, without causing great economic and social distress, I think is for the birds.
Does that mean you would have rather seen an emphasis on tax increases, as opposed to spending cuts?
I think there should have been more tax increases. I'm a baby boomer. I was born in 1950. And, my generation has done very, very well. We've had largely full employment. We've made all of us who bought property 30, 40 years ago are sitting on, great big capital gains. And I think we should pay tax on our property, and I think we should pay into the common pool to alleviate a lot of social distress that our kids are facing. My daughter calls it generation crunch. There are 1 million 18 to 24-year-olds in Britain who are out of work. It's disproportionately, the burden of this is being shared by young people, and my generation are getting away, not completely, but largely scot-free. So I think there should be, that we should have been required to put our hand in our pocket more than we have been, and I think there should have been a great deal more done to protect key programmes outside health, which is being protected. I think capital expenditure should be protected. I think the education system should have been protected much more. And I think that to do that, baby boomers like me should have been disproportionately asked to put their hand in their pocket. But it's a very idiosyncratic view. You're asking, if tomorrow night you get an economist from the centre right, he will say it's all going on from expenditure cuts, and taxing people is wrong and illegitimate. I think taxes are a useful way of managing an economy, both lowering them and increasing them. As
you say, there are about as many views as guests we have on this program. Will Hutton, it's always a great pleasure to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.